Good morning. Happy Women's History Month to all of you out there, both you amazing women that are joining us this morning and certainly the amazing women that are joining us to talk about their work today, and all you amazing men that support the women in your lives. So thank you for being here. We're looking forward to this conversation. I'm Carol Ann Logue. I am director of the Central Florida Tech Grove, which is an innovation hub for Team Orlando in Orlando, Florida, which is really the epicenter of the modeling, simulation, training, and human performance acquisition activities for Department of Defense and a growing number of other agencies in the national security space. And this is a webinar series that we do for 7 months of the year in partnership with NTSA, obviously, where we take the opportunity to really highlight the people and the stories behind the best paper nominees and winners, and the tutorial. We'll be doing the best tutorial this year too, from the most recent ITSIC, because we know we don't all get to go to the presentations, and even when we do, we don't get to hear the fascinating stories behind them and necessarily have the conversation we'd like to have. In looking at the best papers from 2021, it was really easy to select one for our March webinar, since it is International Women's Day and Women's History Month. And this paper, which is a little unusual perhaps in the portfolio of much of the work that's presented at ITSIC, on gender equity in the evolving work environment. And you're going to enjoy hearing the story behind it and meeting these folks. So I do want to encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A, please, not in the chat, because in the Q&A we can type some answers and respond to those a little bit better. We had 2 questions submitted prior to the webinar that we will be addressing, but any others along the way. And it's not a large group today, which in some ways is really good. In some ways it's a little sad, because this is a really important issue that has a lot of implications. So with that, we're going to get started. I want to just read you the abstract from this paper in case you have not had a chance to read the paper, because when I read this abstract, I just thought this is going to be a great conversation with a lot of wide-ranging implications. The United States ranks among the last in the world for supportive work-family policies like family leave, career breaks, childcare, and gender and pay equity, all of which influence career progressions. Companies leading the change by adopting policies that support women and families find they can increase loyalty, engagement, productivity, performance, and create a mutually beneficial relationship for employers and employees. Companies with gender balanced teams have a higher return on equity than less diverse peers. And those statements are supported in a whole range of research that's been done out there over the years. But this work is highlighting particularly some of the issues in companies in the federal contracting space, and more specifically the aerospace and defense sector. So with that, let's meet our authors and experts. Nina Deibler. Nina, if you would just say a few words about yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Nina Deibler, and I have been in the aerospace and defense industry for about 25 years now. My background is instructional systems design, and I always considered myself the least likely person to talk about gender equity. So when this came up, it was kind of unusual, and it really hit home for me. I deliberately do not have a background on, so you can see behind me the desk where my son spent 3rd grade last year during COVID. He is high risk, and we kept him home and decided to homeschool him. He was not virtual. I was the curriculum developer. I was the teacher. I was his full-time nurse, cook, cafeteria, you name it. And with COVID going on, this paper really, really hit home for me personally because of our family situation and the fact that Serco allowed me to work full time and be a full-time teacher for my son during that time, while also coordinating a daughter who was remote for high school. So hearing what was happening to other friends at other companies and in other industries broke my heart, truly, to see what they were going through. And our research really backed that up. So for me, it's a very personal stake. I have a 10-year-old daughter who will be entering the workforce, or a 15-year-old daughter who will be entering the workforce in the next 10 years. She is very interested in aerospace, defense, national security. And I know what I have worked through in the 25 years I've been in this, and I want to leave this place better for her.
Thank you, Nina. Susan.
Good morning. I have worked with Serco in the defense industry for 6.5 years. And during that time, thankfully, Oklahoma City office, where I work from, we have a lot of women in our office. And we have Mike Wong, who is a wonderful site manager. And my personal story relating to that is I had a 32-year-old son 5 years ago who had a brain injury. And I was allowed through my supervisor and Mike to be able to work from his ICU room. And without that empathy and understanding from Mike, I would not have been able to. I'd only worked a year for Mike. So he was very understanding and had a understanding of women and what, as a mother, that I needed to do. Had I not been able to do that, I probably wouldn't have a job. I didn't have enough time built up. I'd only been there a year. But the reason we got started with this paper even was I'm on the diversity and inclusion team with Serco, and we started presenting some facts. Jeff jumped in, the other co-author who couldn't be here today, and he had all kinds of research. So, and he's very interested in the gender pay and the equity. So, and Nina's like, let's write a paper. So here we are.
Oh, Carol-Ann, I think you're muted.
Try to be a good virtual meeting attendee and forget. So thank you, Nina. So, as Susan mentioned, Jeff Coulter could not join us today, but because we concluded that having 3 white middle-aged women alone talking about this topic probably would not do it justice, we did invite Nina and Susan's boss, Mike Wong, who is with us via audio in the meeting this morning. So, Mike, I'm so glad you could be here. And if you would introduce yourself, please.
Yes, good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to join. It kind of happened by spur of the moment, but was glad that Nina contacted me and asked me if I would participate, and I said, of course. And primarily because, as you heard the stories, it's a personal issue for them, but this is also a personal issue for me as a manager because, I consider the folks that work here as part of the quote unquote work family, so to speak. And we really apply that concept to our everyday operations and working with each other. It really doesn't matter about gender necessarily, or race or ethnicity. It's about the personal condition and how you really treat and deal with people at that level. And so, we try to incorporate as much empathy and understanding, and communication is a big, important factor, ensuring that everyone has the ability to, bring their issues forward, whether it's family or work issues, to address them and move forward and find a solution, if at all possible, that we can implement that would be beneficial for all parties concerned. And so being able to just speak to, in this case, the women's issues and bringing that to the forefront, our company has really stepped forward in the last year or so, last couple of years, in promoting women in the work environment and at Serco. Just recently, we had our chief growth officer was hired as a woman back in November. We have a Serco Women's Employee Resource Group that is open to all membership, male and female, throughout Serco North America. And I will say that the number one focus this year for 2022 is advocacy. So, this resource group is a really important as a company initiative, but it also, from the leadership perspective, it has to have support, but it also has to have support at the lowest organizational level, so that we can work from both ends to try to achieve, the goals of actually implementing these kinds of initiatives and getting to the point where it's a institutional issue, a systematic issue, rather than pockets of implementation throughout the organization. So I've been with Serco for about 20 years and have been in the training industry for about 35. And, it really, I found a home at Serco only because I like the people that I work with. And, that has really transitioned down to, our organization at the local level with Nina, Susan, and Jeff. And I really appreciate the opportunity that you've given me to join and participate.
Thank you, Mike. I look forward to you jumping in. With that, I want to just go through a few of the things that really jumped out from the paper as some topics to have some dialogue around. But I want to start with a question. We throw phrases like gender equity out there a lot. How do you really define gender equity, though? What does that mean? And is there a standard definition? Nina, Susan?
Yeah, there really is not a standard definition, but I think when you look at it, it really just comes down to equal treatment, right? And gender is one category. So, we know there are definite issues with race. And then when you add race and gender, that compounds those issues. And then when you add, sexual orientation, that further compounds those issues. So when it comes to gender equity and the workforce, I really tend to think about it as, pay, promotion, and benefits. So we know that on average, a woman earns 81 cents compared to a man. If you're a woman of color, your average is 75 cents for every dollar that a man works. And then when you account for lifetime earnings, so women often take off time to raise children or, be away from work, caring for elders, whatever it is. Over the course of her lifetime, on average, a woman is only earning 67 cents for every dollar a man makes. Then you add the additional burden that women tend to carry, imposed by our society. And I think the notorious RGB spoke to this really well when, she would talk about the school calling and saying, Mrs. Ginsburg, your child is sick. Can you come pick him up? And she's like, why did you call me? Call her dad. But that's how society treats the mother, right? So if you're a parent, the automatic call goes to you when your child is sick. And while you're at home, you're typically preparing meals and doing the laundry and most of the childcare activities. So equity applies across the spectrum, because now we're not just talking about pay at work. We're also talking about workload away from work. And all research says that on average, a woman works the equivalent of a mother works the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs if she's a working parent. So when we're talking gender equity, we're not just talking about in the workplace, we're talking about in the world in which we live, society as it's currently structured, that women are bearing the brunt of not only having a full-time job and being an earner or primary earner in their home or sole earner in their home, but also being the primary caregiver for any family at home. You know, if my parents get sick, my brother is not stepping in, I'm stepping in. So, so when we're talking equality, I think we're looking across the spectrum of the burden that women are bearing and set up to bear compared to men.
There was a statement in your paper, a point that was made that pointed out a real dichotomy in society that I suspect many men and women have experienced, and that is that there is this expectation of our role as women, which we readily take on because we're caregivers, we're nurture. That's how we were created, right? Simultaneously, if we're in a work environment, we often, data shows, feel are sent, the message is sent that we have to prove ourselves more. And so there seems to be this conflict that this message is being sent. We expect you to fill your talents as a woman, but we also expect you to have to prove yourself, and it doesn't work. Any comments on that real conflict in society, and with our constant focus on productivity and doing more?
I know Nina has worked at home for a long time. She's worked remotely. I've only currently begun working remotely full time since the pandemic, but I think because of that, it has allowed us to do both roles. We can take that break, take care of the child, run, go get them from school when they're sick. You know, we still deal with issues with our son with the brain injury. So I'm allowed that time to take care of things that I need to take care of, but yet I can still be productive, still meet deadlines, still have meetings, all of that. So it's been a blessing in the long run for COVID, in a way, if you want to look at it that way. I try to see the positives. So it has been a blessing in that women, mothers, are allowed to be able to do that if we work from home. That being said, a lot of women were not offered that. Their job did not accommodate that. So they had to quit to take care of what needed to be taken care of.
Yeah, and I think
Mike,
just from your
okay.
Oh no, I was just going to say, you know, the situation with the respect, I think it kind of applies both ways. I have been a full-time remote employee for over 16 years now. And most of that time I worked for Mike. So, but it was always that I was an adult and he would know if my work was not getting done. He would know if things were interfering. He left it to me, and has always left it to me, to say, hey, I have this issue, or there's something going on I need help with. But he showed respect for me in the workforce that meant I did not have to prove myself every day. Serco does not monitor when I log in and when I log out. They do not expect me to be at my desk, 8 hours straight or whatever. They expect responsiveness, but there is not the micromanagement of me as an employee. And I think that's partly why I have been able to flourish. And I think that is why so many other women in the workforce are not able to, because their company culture is such that they are monitored. They are expected to constantly be on and constantly perform. And because they may have a family, there's an additional, monitoring, I want to say, of how many sick days they've taken. Oh, their kid is sick again. And I have seen that at previous employers. I see it with friends. There is this disdain for the fact that, like, you have this other responsibility, and without that other responsibility, right, society ends, right? If we're not raising families and having children, I mean, who's going to be our future workforce? So it is a huge obligation, not just personally, but to society, to be a parent. So when a company's culture is essentially quashing that person and making them feel like every day they have to be better and better, and that they can't have a bad day, I think it sets women and it sets businesses up for failure. When you treat everyone with respect, everyone feels better and feels more equal.
Mike, I'm going to turn to you now to comment on something, and then after that, we'll dive specifically into the federal contracting, aerospace, and defense industries. But Mike, I was really struck by part of the acknowledgement of the paper where statements from your CEO that were repeatedly conveyed to all of you throughout this very challenging last couple of years when everybody was faced, men and women, with a lot of challenges. And your CEO's consistent statement, take care of your elders, your pets, and your children. And as long as we're meeting our client deliverables and keeping our clients happy, I don't care if it takes you 24 hours to get in your 8 hours of work. That's an interesting statement. And Mike, as a manager, as a boss, what did you see in terms of how the team overall responded to that and what that did for the company through these last couple of years that you might not have seen otherwise?
Yeah, so that was a very profound statement directly from the CEO on video to at first the managers, the leaders of the company, and then to the general population of the company. And if you really think about it, it's really breaking down the paradigms that we've established in industry and approaching it from a different perspective. If there's not a critical timeline that's associated with a deliverable, and we can be flexible in how we dedicate our time and effort to that, then why shouldn't we create an environment like that? So there are going to be certain circumstances where, of course, there are going to be requirements to be in the workplace, for instance, manufacturing, assembly lines, that kind of stuff, where it is a requirement to be physically at the workplace and be there at specific times and accomplish certain tasks during that day. But where there's not, we should open up our aperture and allow, other opportunities to achieve the same objective in multiple different paths. So those statements really drove home, I think, to the employees of Serco that, if you're taking care of your families and you're taking care of your home, and you're taking care of your job obligations, then what is really the necessity for me to step in and say, this is what the standard is, this is how you are going to perform, and there's no deviation from that. So it's really about breaking down those paradigms. And also, I think that one of the biggest things is establishing relationship. When the CEO comes out and says those things, he is really establishing a personal connection and a relationship with each employee. And it's not just about the institution, the company, and policy. It's about making the connection to each individual worker and letting them know that it's not one size fits all. And so that's really important. We've tried to do that for years here on our team, and it's been successful. We were ahead of the game when it came to remote working because we were prepared. COVID did not impact our team very significantly at all. So it was a natural transition for us to go 100% remote for all of our staff and continue to produce the way we needed to.
Thank you. And for those of you that are joining us today, I would love for in the chat, just if you have a comment about your company, organization experience and how they were supportive or perhaps throughout all this, we'd love to hear your feedback too. So I want to switch now to the specific sector that you really focused on in this paper a little bit, which was the federal contracting and specifically the aerospace and defense industry and some of the companies you highlighted there. In the introduction of the paper, there's one of the statements is that overall 1/4 of executive level positions in aerospace and defense companies were held by women in 2018, a much higher share than at most technology-heavy companies, and roughly in line with the 22% share of women in the overall aerospace and defense workforce. The question that immediately came to mind was, why is the percentage of women in executive positions in the workforce that high in the aerospace and defense world when I know in other technology sectors it's not? Any insights on that?
I really don't have any good insights on that, except that they're seeing results. So the companies, research has shown companies with female leadership outperform those with male leadership significantly, by and large. So, and I think it goes to, women's leadership style, which tends to seek win-win solutions versus win-lose or, kind of draw. Let's find something that works for everyone, the more collaborative nature of how women tend to work. But I do feel like the industry has put a strong emphasis on trying to elevate women's status in the workplace because of the possibility of women in fields. So, and obviously not all of aerospace and defense is STEM related. Susan and I are instructional systems designers, so we're not in a STEM related field, but it's still, our clients are mostly men. Our subject matter experts are mostly men. Corporately in the industry, most of those STEM people that we're working with are still men. So I feel like the industry is making a strong and concerted effort to promote women who are, qualified and doing the right things. I'm not sure if that's fully reality. I guess that's my perception of what is probably happening.
Susan, Mike, you have any comments on that?
This is Mike. Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with maybe the relationship of the DoD industry with the Department of Defense, and with the military maybe being a promoter of women promotion and positions in authority. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it has to do with being exposed to the ability to be upwardly mobile and mm-hmm. be in leadership positions. Mm-hmm. So I think that might have something to do with it.
Mm-hmm. And I'm
sorry, I kind of blipped out.
Yeah, that's okay. You blip back. That's what's good.
I blipped back. In the last 15 or so years, education has put more emphasis on STEM in elementary, junior high, high school. So I think we're starting to see those results now. And I think just in the next 10, 15 years, we're going to see a bigger improvement in that.
You did point out in your paper the changing policies and practices in the Department of Defense and the various services in giving substantially more childbirth leave for paternal and maternal leave when there's an issue with the family in some way, and that's becoming more institutionalized. And you theorized or hypothesized, I guess, that would begin to have a more substantial impact on the defense industrial base as well. Comments on any of that and maybe more insight of what you're seeing?
So I think the military has the same problem that industry is seeing right now. And I think most of you in industry are well aware of, most of our society after COVID knows. I mean, there are far more jobs right now than there are people in the workforce. And that applies at all levels, from your service related positions at, fast food restaurants, all the way up the chain. We had a massive outflux of baby boomers from the workforce when COVID hit. They said, I don't want to deal with this. My 401k looks pretty decent. I'm out of here. They mostly have no intention of returning to work. So we think it's just, our perception is that, people just don't want to work. The young people don't want to work. It's not just that. There was a massive exodus of workers from the workforce. Workers 55, 60 and up just said, I'm done. I'm out of here. So there's way more jobs than there are people to fill those jobs in industry. Then you go and you look at our services where we are paying people far less than they deserve for the work that they do daily, putting their lives at risk. So how do we keep those people? So why do companies change policies? Why does the military change their policy? They're realizing they have a retention problem. So if you want to retain men and women in the workforce, you need to start setting up policies that allow them to have a happy life and do their job. And I think that's where the military was pushing so hard. Women were hitting childbearing age and saying, I want to have a family. I can't be out on a ship for 6 months or 8 months. Mm-hmm. I can't be in at work at 5 a.m. if the childcare center isn't open. So they were leaving. And so I think, the Navy was the first service to institute those parental leave policies. And I think I'm not sure it's early enough yet, or I'm not sure it's, if we're not far enough into it yet to know how significant that's been with their retention. But I feel like it has to be turning things around because you're not having all of those women and men leave the service. And most of them know they can earn more in the private sector. So you've got to do some things to keep people in the service. And then likewise, when your workforce is working with those service members, right? Your aerospace and defense service is working with those active duty military members and seeing, so, Sally just had a baby and she's going to get, 3 months of paid leave to help give that child a good start in life. And my company doesn't pay me anything. We need to do something to change this. And so I feel like there's a push-pull happening there with industry and with DoD that is only going to be better. There's in the services, there's a million different metrics, and we didn't dig deeply into those areas because we were trying to focus a little bit more on industry that serves them. But, in the military, divorce rates are significantly higher than in the private sector. And then you add on top of that mental health issues of dependent family members, significantly higher than their private sector counterparts. So again, as the military looking at that, you're like, well, if we want these people to stay in, we need to do some adjusting to make life better. And I think what's happening there out of necessity to, keep us war ready is also impacting the private sector that serves them.
I think also that leads into our subtitle that Carol suggested was, why men want this too. If women are given longer parental leave, then that can lead into men also getting parental leave if they don't have it yet. So there's a lot of benefits for men in this area.
I'm curious, and one of our attendees raised part of this question too about whether or not your research went deep enough that you saw any differences between larger companies and smaller companies. And then another part of that question is with the really multi-generational workforce we have these days, 5 generations in the workforce pretty much. And all that we're hearing and even seeing about younger generations being much more holding in high value of family life, personal life, that mythical work-life balance thing, whether either of those aspects surfaced in this phase of the research in any way.
So we did not dig deeply into large versus small employers, mainly because it's just harder to find data on smaller businesses. So we in particular focused on large businesses like the Washington Technology top 100 federal contractors. That was an easy place to start looking because we know what their revenues are, and we could, for the most part, find what their what their family policies and things were. So we really looked closely at that. Our plan for next year, we have submitted an abstract that will go up for review next week. Our plan for next year is to look much more personally at all of those generations, Carol Ann. So we want to get more demographic data and see. I know someone asked about, women who don't have family or kids yet. What do they need to feel equal? Obviously, pay is still an issue, and there are lots of factors that can lead up to that, and we address some of them in the paper. But we want to ask, what do you want? So at this stage in your career, Carolyn, what are you looking for? Susan, what are you looking for? Nina, what are you looking for? Just graduated from college, trying to climb the ladder. What are you looking for as you think about, potentially, family in the next 5 to 10 years? So we actually want to dig much deeper into that for 2022. So that paper will look at company size, your age demographic, what generational influences you have, and then your personal preference. So we want to look at men and women, because we did hear from lots of men that they want and need this too. I mentioned earlier, at Serco, in our small group in Oklahoma City, we have about 32 people now, I think. We have several single dads who are primary caregivers for their children, in addition to the single moms. So it really is not about gender for us. It's about who is stepping up in those roles. And we also have some younger, we've recently, in like the last year and a half, 2 years, we've hired several younger, much younger than the rest of us, folks. And I know they have specific things that they're looking for as well. So, what we want to do for 2022 is figure out what exactly people want, and then look at what policies we need, what corporate policies, what legislative policies. In the paper, we talk a lot about FMLA and kind of what a joke that has been for most of us, because the assumption is when you take FMLA, you're still getting paid. And that is not the reality. You're getting some job protection for 12 weeks. If your company chooses to pay you, that's amazing. They're up there in that gold standard that we talk about of employers, but most companies are not paying you for that time, whether you're taking it to care for your elder, care for your significant other, or care for a child. It's it can be used for all of them, but you're not getting paid. And most families in America cannot afford 3 months with no income from one or both parents.
Such a multifaceted issue and challenge, as mentioned early on and alluded to now. In our remaining 20 minutes or so, I'd like to start moving into some of the forward-looking potential solutions that you mentioned in the paper, and I'm sure we'll explore further in the next phase of the work. You talked about industry responsibility, legislative considerations, even gave some recommendations for ITSIC, which we'll wind up with. But let's park on industry responsibilities for a minute. And you did have an excerpt of the Washington Technologies 2020 top 100 federal contractors rated as best companies for working women. I didn't go look at the whole list, but what did strike me is the portion of the list that's in here is that by and large, these are really very large companies for the most part. And as someone who works with a lot of small, medium-sized companies, it is hard for smaller companies sometimes to just, from a business financial perspective, perhaps, institute some of the same things that larger contractors have. So just share some insights, and maybe some of you on the call share some insights about, for smaller, medium-sized companies, what are some of the things that they might consider from an industry perspective that you see would be beneficial?
So a good friend of mine actually works for or owns a small company and provides, and this is a woman, a single woman with no children who is near my age. She provides her employees with paid maternity leave. She has very flexible work policies, and she just builds that into her equation. She looks at that as the cost of doing business. If she wants to attract and retain good people, that's, she said, is a no-brainer. And she doesn't understand how her little tiny company can do that. And these massive contractors cannot do that. Part of that, I honestly think, is that generally small businesses are much more agile than large businesses, and they don't have shareholders. They don't have shareholders who are looking to make massive profits from the labors of their wee folks, you know. So a small business is really looking at, I need to get great people, and what do I need to do to keep those people really happy? Where a big business is looking at, I have these many shareholders and I've got to keep them happy. And oh yeah, I mean, maybe if my employees are happy, then the shareholders will make some profits, but really I'm most concerned about my shareholders. And I think that's the difference with small businesses.
Right.
And I could argue that with small businesses. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Susan.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Carol.
I was just going to comment that small businesses too, the impact on any individual employee of things going on in their personal life has a much more visible impact on the company in general, perhaps, than in larger companies too. And the CEO is often more aware of things going on. So that could have something to do with it. Susan?
My daughter is an attorney, and she worked for one company, and she had a miscarriage. And they really belittled her for taking the day off when she had the miscarriage, that it was a big issue. And then she worked for a nonprofit up until the birth of her daughter at the end of January, and she had absolutely zero maternity leave. I know other nonprofits who do have maternity leave. And so at the end of this month, she's going to be beginning work for Ernst & Young, who they're number 67 in the top 100. And she's very tickled about that. And she gets to work from home. So a whole big change there from two of the companies that she had worked for. So, it's a matter of wanting to do what's right for your employees. I go back to the adage for women, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So, think about that. If you've got a working mom who's spending all of her time juggling kids, a sick child like Nina's son, who has a lifelong illness, we need to think about that. Companies need to think about that.
So perhaps it's not so much related to the size of the company as it is the people at the top of the company and their understanding of these issues and the value of having this kind of equity in the company. So, Mike, you're not going to get off the hook here from addressing this issue too. as a manager in the company, I want to ask you about mentors and role models, which was also addressed in the paper to some degree. How do you help facilitate that kind of relationship within the company? Do you as a company encourage mentoring relationships, role models?
Yes, up and down the chain, we have mentorship. Most of the time we think of it mentorship as at the local or the lower level, in bringing on new individuals and mentoring them to move to more responsibility, take on additional responsibility, help them achieve their professional goals and objectives. So our performance appraisal process, it encourages and institutes a systematic way of doing catch-up meetings with our employees on a periodic basis. So every couple weeks, every month, there's a deliberate schedule and methodology to making sure that supervisors and employees meet together and discuss the things that are important, not only in the job, but also in their personal life. So it's holistic. It's a holistic approach rather than, what have you done for me today? It's interesting also that the Serco Women Employee Resource Group that I mentioned earlier, they actually have a women's mentorship program up and down from the senior vice president level all the way down through to supervisors and managers. So it's and anybody, men and women, can be a part of that. So it's really interesting. It brings a unique dynamic to that true mentorship capability, because it's not really focusing on, again, gender in this case. It's focusing on the individual and making that connection, helping individuals grow and develop professionally and also personally. So it's really great here.
When we talk about mentor relationships, we often tend to focus more on the impact on the mentee, but what is a mentor? How do you see it affecting those who step up to serve as mentors, and how that helps perpetuate the culture that you have at Serco?
It's a tremendous asset. Like I said early on, a relationship doesn't go one way. A relationship goes in both directions. So in this case, the mentor and the mentee are both benefiting from that relationship. And, a lot of times as a mentor, we are not exposed to a lot of personal situations or work environment situations that we've never been exposed to before. But it exposes us and allows us to address maybe some existing paradigms that we've had and make adjustments to that. So I think it's a very beneficial approach, because, again, if we're not focusing necessarily on what the mentor is providing the mentee, but also understand that the mentee brings value to that relationship and does open perspective for the mentor also. So, but we have a kind of informal, formal mentorship program within our program, and it focuses primarily on technical development, but you can't help but to also gain personal development at the same time that you're working together one-on-one or in small groups to really, integrate the personal aspect of life within the work environment.
Thank you. And just last question on the industry aspect of this work. You have some specific examples of some of the things that companies should consider and do as they're trying to really improve their culture and policies. And that starts out with clarify what gender equity means for the company and what the goals really are there, as well as developing that gender equity vision and identifying the gaps you have and identifying and using champions. So for a company, perhaps some of those that are on the call, that they're thinking, we really need to have more conversation internally in our company about how to do this. Where would you suggest they start as an industry member to find great information or guidance or help in doing this?
So there's a lot of information out there. There in the paper, we actually provide a set of recommendations that companies, like questions companies should ask. And we basically say, you need to survey your employees and you need to find out, what their titles are. I mean, titles matter. So what are their titles? What is their pay? Is that pay commensurate with that title? Was that title arbitrary, random? Who are the gender of the people in this title versus that title? Age, education, looking at all those factors. We actually outline that in the paper. So it's very easy to survey your employees. We always survey them about, are you happy at work? And, what do you want? Nobody ever asks them about their salary or what benefits would matter. I mean, there's a lot of people that would take less salary to have more vacation. There are people who would forget about vacation and salary if they had just some flexibility in their schedule. For some people, their medical benefits are more important. As a company, unless you ask those questions, you don't know. So companies are always asking their employees, what is our culture like and what are we like, but never getting to the nitty gritty, like, do you think your title accurately reflects what you do? Does your pay equal the value to you in this organization? Are you more educated than someone in this higher, category because you've been here less time or whatever? So really looking at those kind of things would go a long way to get an organization started down the path to more gender equity. If you can matrix all of those factors with your employees and take a good, hard look at the data, then I think it would be very telling for most organizations that, they may or may not have a problem.
Susan, is this some of what the group you work with internally in the company does?
I think we are very good in our group, we have a lot of very strong-willed women, Nina, me, and we're not afraid to speak up when there's something to say. Now, and we're allowed to. I know we've addressed this in the paper. Another option is gender bias training to help teach men to allow women to speak. Don't dismiss them because they're a woman and have something to say. Many companies do that. And I don't feel like I've never not been heard. Maybe once or twice when I talk too much. But other than that, no, I always feel like I've been heard. So I think that's very important. In the paper, I think it was like 40% or 45% said they have difficulty speaking up in meetings because men just kind of steamroll right over them. So that's important.
Interrupt them.
Understand that, I'm sorry, I was speaking, and there's a way for women to say that. Of course, we're called the B word and everything else if we do that. No, that's not what we are. We're trying to get our point across. We're trying to speak up.
Yeah, and I think that goes really to the role of male allies. So early in my career, I sat in, almost every meeting I was ever in, I was the sole woman. I voluntarily became the secretary and recorder of those meetings because I figured out that if I was taking the notes, they reflected my perception of what was really happening versus, some other man. So I didn't look at it as a secretary thing. I looked at it as I'm the recorded word. But when I would speak up, I frequently got here she goes again, from some of the men. But there were a couple of men that I worked with who would say, stop, let her go. Let her say what she needs to say. I remember them well. I remember, the respect that they gained from me in stepping up and doing that. And I remember the jaws that dropped from the other men when one man stood up and said, "No, let her talk." And it made a huge difference to me personally and professionally. So, one man in a meeting that says, "Let her talk," can make, can literally change the trajectory of a woman's career and the respect
Exactly.
that she is given by her peers. And I think if more men would step up and take that attitude, I think they would earn more respect too, even from their peers, that they're not afraid to take a stand for what's right and do what's right. So we frequently, say there's this whole problem with gender equity, and there is, but men are more a part of the solution to that than I think they understand. It's not just the men saying, "Yes, we'll pay you more." It's the men saying, "We are going to step in and make it right."
Exactly. Even not in the workplace, Nina. I had a similar situation I was a board of directors member, and there was only 3 women out of 22 total board of directors members. And I spoke up every time I would try to speak up and suggest something or whatever. It was like somebody would just talk right over me. And finally, a friend of mine who was also on the board said, "Why don't we listen to what she has to say? Women have a different perspective." And from that point on, I was actually listened to. Now, did I always get my way? No, that wasn't the point. Just listen to my perspective because it's different.
And it might be really valuable, right? Well, let's take a couple of minutes here because we're getting to the 1300 hour here, or the noon hour. I'm wrong time zone. ITSEC, you had some general recommendations for NTSA perhaps to consider as the ITSEC committees to consider. Maybe just mention a few of those because many of the folks on the call are probably on ITSEC subcommittees.
Yeah, so I mean, ITSEC has made great strides just in the past, 10 years or so in really promoting STEM at the much younger levels, high school, and getting things engaged. And I had the privilege of, sponsoring or being in many of the sessions where those students came in and presented their projects, and they were phenomenal projects. But I think, one thing ITSEC could do would be to, when those high schools are submitting those projects, ensure that the teams have a balance of gender equity, because still, even in the high schools, many of the projects were boys and not girls. So, that's one thing. Another thing would be, just requiring some gender equity within those projects. Another thing would be doing the survey. We are hoping that NTSA and ITSEC will join us if our abstract is accepted for a 2022 paper. We're hoping that they will help us disseminate this survey to their membership to get this data about, what do employees of all ages in this industry in particular want, and how do we get better equity across them. And then really, recognizing the breadth of experience that women are bringing across careers. So STEM is one thing, but many of the women involved in ITSEC are in business development, or, on the training side of things, or as Mike mentioned earlier, they're federal employees, they're DoD employees. Really recognizing the breadth of roles that they're in. I think a lot of times the assumption is, oh, if you're there, you're this. But sort of bringing some notoriety to that. I think ITSEC does a phenomenal job of balancing, its committee membership and representation and those types of things. But I think if we could use the conference and use, NTSA's sponsorship of that to reach out and get more data from women about what they really want, I think that it would it would have a huge impact on the companies that it serves.
In our last 15 seconds, I'm just going to encourage all of you that are on the call. I would suggest that if you would like to participate in the next survey that they're doing, to reach out to Nina and or Susan. If you go to the website that is in the chat for the paper, you can find their email information. And I am so thankful to all of you for joining us today. We hope to see you back for our March webinar, which will be soon published on the NTSA events website, as well as the Tech Grove outreach through social media. Thank you so much, Nina, Susan, Mike. This has been a great conversation. We could go on and on, but with that, we will wind it up for today. And we'll look forward to Gender Equity 2.0 from you.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks, Carol Ann.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.